one of our compositions we're proud to play, Serenade to a Cuckoo.
Now, I understand also was in 2020, you were granted the most highest prestigious honor for a jazz musician or someone involved in jazz, the NEA Jazz Master. I have a t-shirt on from Dorthaan Kirk, your husband, and I must say, he was on Atlantic Records. As you know, my father, CB Bullard, was with Atlantic. So I would hear all of his music around the house. You must have traveled a lot with your husband, am I correct?
90% of the time.
Wow. So you got a chance to meet the best of the best in jazz. Now, tell us a little bit about this. I saw an article one day, many months ago, in the New York Times, and there were pictures of you, and I called you. I think I was in a cab. I said, Dorthaan, there's this article in the New York Times about this racial uproar at WBGO. And you said, I know, Clyde. I helped them write the article. Welcome everyone to Odds and Ends Jazz, life, entertainment, theater, and the arts. And tonight we are presenting a very special woman whom I believe that everyone in the jazz world knew or wishes that they did know. And that is NEA Jazz Master Dorthaan Kirk. When Bob Ottenhoff hired her in 1979, the two of them are credited with starting and spearheading WBGO 88.3, which is the preeminent jazz station in the world. She has been advocating jazz and supporting musicians and even bringing Jazz to Kids, a program which brings jazz to venues. She brought drummer Winard Harper to Flushing Town Hall. And in 2020, she was given her NEA Jazz Master Endowment, along with Reggie Workman, Roscoe Mitchell, and Bobby McFerrin, and her late husband, Dorthaan Kirk, who played multiple horns at one time and is in the Guinness Book of World Records. She managed his career. There's so many things we could say about her, but we're going to let her explain about her life and the many triumphs and trials that she has lived through. And so without further ado, and with great pleasure, all of us at Odds and Ends Jazz present to you NEA Jazz Master Dorthaan Kirk.
A few years ago, there was an article on me in the New York Times. They called me Newark's First Lady of Jazz. And it stuck. I was born in Texas. I was 17 when I moved to Los Angeles. At that time, it was jumping. All the young people went out to see jazz. I met Dorthaan through a mutual friend, and when Dorthaan would come to town, he became one of the artists that came to my house to have a good home-cooked meal. Even though it was 7 short years, it was like 20 years because so much I did in that short period of time. After our son died, one of his friends who worked in public radio says to me, "There's this guy that lives right here in Newark, and he's starting a radio station." I said, "Steve, I don't know anything about radio." This is Steve Robinson, who recommended me work at WBGO. That's Bob Ottenhoff, the founder. Bob Ottenhoff, we had a long talk, and he just said, "Yes, I'll hire you." And I thought, these young white guys are nuts. We moved into the current WBGO January 1979 with absolutely nothing but a couple of old desks. 40 years later, and BGO has never looked back since. That children's concert series was one of the things that I was most proud of. I produced that for 25 years plus. I'm at home. I want to see who's still up here.
I love her. Can I hug her?
Oh, this is great. Newark, in spite of its growth, it doesn't have a jazz club. Through working at WBGO and knowing all these artists, I produce Jazz Vespers at my church. It's become a huge, huge community event, almost like the big club to go to in Newark. We're now celebrating 20 years. That's a lot. I do look back at all I've done. It's overwhelming. Little old me. And I must say, it's because of the support of all these musicians coming to my rescue, as I call it, because the musicians know I've got their back.
Welcome, Dorthaan Kirk, NEA Jazz Master Dorthaan Kirk, my friend, my colleague, and you were always my secret weapon and ally at WBGO for all those years. Thank you for being on the show and allowing me to interview you. And you are our first NEA Jazz Master. We call this Odds and Ends Jazz because we're starting a whole new section where I'm going to be interviewing just great jazz artists and people involved in jazz like yourself. But I want to say this too. You, along with Todd Barkin, Wynton Marsalis, Nat Hentor, Phil Schaap, Gary Giddens, and Gary Walker, all of you have forgotten more about jazz than I know now. Although I've been producing and curating jazz shows, I'm just getting my feet wet. And so I bow to you and all of the others, and I welcome you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. And I feel those names that you named, that you have put me in really great company. So
no.
I'm happy to do whatever you asked me. And I do remember those days at WBGO. And we did have an opportunity to work together a little bit. Remember, I did the children's concert series way out in Queens. You
put jazz for kids to Flushing Town Hall, you and Mr. Gary Walker.
Yeah.
And that was featuring Winard Harper.
See, I didn't even remember who we had, but I remember. Oh, no. Because I remember not wanting to go, as I call it, way from Jersey to Queens on a Saturday morning.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that was a great concept. It was a great concept because it was introducing children to jazz at a young age. But the key was a lot of adults would try to sneak in the concert without children, and you had to come into the concert with a child on your arms, whether it was yours or someone else's.
Oh, absolutely. That was the criteria. Okay. It was a free concert, but you must bring a child. And also, you were responsible for the Flushing Town Hall, making me one of the honorees
Yes,
one year.
we honored you there. That's right.
Recently.
Well, you had done so much for the organization and for me as a fledgling producer curator. We had to give it back, and BGO is, I would say, the premier jazz station in the world. I mean, every artist that plays jazz, I believe, would hope that BGO would play and present their music. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but also I have a T-shirt on from Dorthaan Kirk, your husband, and I must say he was on Atlantic Records. As you know, my father, CB Bullard, was with Atlantic, so I would hear all of his music around the house. My father would play all the Atlantic releases, Funk Underneath, quote from Clifford, Ain't No Sunshine, and of course, Bright Moments, which was recorded, I believe, live at Keystone Corner, Todd Barkin's most favorite club, the original Keystone Corner. And Todd Barkin loved that song. He would always make quotes from Bright Moment, and on his answering service, he would end the message saying Bright Moments. Kind of got close to Todd Barkin because at one point I was playing for the Boys Choir Harlem and Todd Barkin had taken it over. I feel that Dorthaan Kirk's music should be heralded more. I mean, it's really great music. It swings, the lines are scientific. It's just great music and all the things that jazz should be. And from what I understand, he's in the Guinness Book of Records. He normally played 3 horns at once. Am I correct?
Yes.
But I think in the Guinness Book of Records, he might be in there because I think he may have played 5. He was playing up.
I don't know about that. So, but don't go by what I know. It's so much I don't know about him. Okay.
Really? Well, I know he played the Manzello.
I didn't even know he was in the Guinness because I read something a long time ago where he was at Ronnie Scott's and they tried
London
to get them to come there. And they wouldn't do it. That's all I remember. Guinness World Book of Records.
He didn't want to play at Ronnie Scott's?
No. The Guinness World Book of Records didn't want to come to Ronnie Scott's for him. He would play those really long solos or notes or whatever they wanted him to do. I wasn't there, but I read that.
But you did travel.
Ronnie Scott's was a favorite place. He played there.
It still is.
Probably every 15, 16 months or so. Because whenever he would go, Pete King actually, who ran it, because Ronnie Scott was on the road a lot, being a musician himself. Pete King ran the place. And they would practically book him for the next time when he was there.
Wow. So you must have traveled a lot with your husband. Am I correct?
90% of the time.
Wow. So you got a chance to meet the best of the best in jazz.
Whatever that means, I guess. I guess back in the day.
Yes. WBGO, it had its inception, its real start. Was that 1979 or before then?
Well, I have to find a way to give you the short version, not the scenic route. The license was actually transferred from the Newark Board of Education to Newark Public Radio Inc.
Hmm.
before we moved into the building, which was January 1979. The
Right.
license had already been transferred.
Hmm.
And if you've seen the WBGO documentary, it tells the story of how it became Newark Public Radio Incorporated from the Newark Board of Education.
It's a story of a community of people that came together to create a cultural institution that has affected the lives of millions of people. What to me is the most gratifying is the success of the station has been made possible because of thousands of people playing some role, big and small, in making it happen.
I see.
Mhm.
And it's still probably the most preeminent station in the world. And I would also have to say I give a lot of respect to Gary Walker, because he used to tell me he would be with my father going to the Cafe Carlisle with the Modern Jazz Quartet with with John Lewis, Connie Kay, Percy Heath, and Milt Jackson. And people used to think that Gary Walker, he told me, was his doctor because he was a white gentleman, which was funny. And
I heard that. That's funny. I have to tell Gary that.
and I understand you were there at the Cafe Carlisle sometimes. Am I correct?
I was there because I was always on the list when the record companies showcased their musicians at the different venues in New York.
Yes.
I was one of the people that was always on the invited list. So yes, I was. And I really remember that. I don't remember a lot about the night, but I remember being there.
Of course, because I'm quite sure WBGO probably played the Modern Jazz Quartet in its lineups. I'm quite sure.
Oh, of course.
And, because of you, I have set up interviews at WBGO through you with Gary Walker for Jimmy Heath, Barry Harris, Jimmy Owens, John Hendricks. I would call you for an interview, and you would get an answer from me usually in a day, 2 days at most. I mean, you were a great conduit for me and doing what I do at Flushing Town Hall, which I've been there now going on 24 years. First as the producer, now I'm considered the producer in residence. So I will never forget all of the great favors that you had given me. I also
at one time that was part of my job responsibilities. So the only time it became a little bit touchy is if I got a request for an interview for an artist that I knew WBGO either didn't play or wasn't interested in for whatever reason.
And that wasn't too many times, am I correct?
Not too many, but any time is too many because you just don't like to say no to an artist and he or she is trying to promote their craft, so
Yes.
it leaves you finding creative ways to say no sometimes.
Right. Really not giving them the truth, but kind of just still giving them hope, saying no, but still giving some hope to them to keep going on. Now, I understand also what is in 2020, you were granted the most highest prestigious honor for a jazz musician or someone involved in jazz, the NEA Jazz Master.
I'm a 2019 Jazz Master. The ceremony took place in 2020.
Wow.
It was originally to be in April of 20 at the SF Center,
San Francisco.
But as we all know, COVID brought the whole world to a screeching halt. So
Yes.
last August, the ceremony was held virtually.
Interesting. And you were in very good company. I mean, Bobby McFerrin, Roscoe Mitchell, Reggie Workman. I mean, all of these gentlemen and yourself have done and made amazing contributions to the music. You know, like Phil Schaap, my colleague and my brother, he says, we're just trying to keep the gospel alive, you know? We're trying to keep this music alive because I deem all of you new millennium griots. Like in the African tradition, they would pass history on. What you are doing, and Phil Schaap and Gary Giddens and Gary Walker, you're passing it on to the next generation. That's why I have so much I can learn from you. Now, tell us a little bit about this. I saw an article one day, many months ago, in the New York Times, and there were pictures of you, and I called you. I think I was in a cab. I said, Dorthaan, there's this article in the New York Times about this racial uproar at WBGO. And you said, I know, Clyde. I helped them write the article. And I was like, oops, okay, you know. Can you just tell us so the listeners can understand, what was that uproar about?
There have been quite a few issues at WBGO over the years that had to do with race, with different kinds of unfairness. And someone wrote an op-ed about it in November of 19. And after that op-ed came out, I think that's when the issues at WBGO had become public. So the New York Times, it was very ironic because the New York Times had decided to do an article on WBGO the next 40 years. WBGO had just turned 40.
Right.
And the New York Times was going to do an article that was about what's WBGO to be the next 40 years. Interestingly enough, when that article came out, the op-ed, they had to change their focus. The person that wrote the article you're talking about, she and I just happened to be friends, and I will tell you how we became friends. When I started consulting for NJPAC and the festival, along with some other things, there was an article on me in the New Jersey Monthly that she wrote. And a couple of years later, she wrote an article on me in the New York Times. So through that, we have become friends. So when she read the op-ed, she called me up, and now the New York Times need to incorporate what's happening at WBGO at that particular time, in addition to focusing on what will it be the next 40 years. So that's how that article came about. And needless to say, as she was writing it and speaking to different people, she would, of course, call me to verify whatever information she had received was correct.
Right.
So did you got all that? It was pretty convoluted, but that's how I came to kind of be involved with the article.
And the director that was there amidst all of this uproar, I think she resigned or stepped down or something.
That's what the article said, Clyde.
Okay.
I'm going to leave it at that.
I hear you. I hear what you ain't saying. That's cool.
Right.
But so everything at BGO now is kind of running smoothly like it was before, you would say.
I will say that Steve Williams is a great person that they have chosen to be president because he's been in broadcasting his whole life. He's had many different kinds of jobs in broadcasting, and I'm counting on him to take WBGO to the next step because
Yes.
I think he has the vision.
Yes. Since your retirement from WBGO, you've been focusing more on producing your own concerts at the Bethany Baptist Church as well as NJPAC. Am I correct?
I have to tell you exactly how it is. They aren't mine.
Okay.
I'm a member of Bethany.
Okay.
2000, our minister, Dr. Moses William Howard Jr., created Jazz Vespers that we presented at Bethany every first Saturday. Okay. So that was an initiative of Bethany. After John Schreiber came as president at NJPAC, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, he started many new and different things. So he hired me as a consultant to work with them on the TD James Moody Jazz Festival. He decided that he'd like the festival to kick off at Bethany every year. And they became a partner. And since that time, NJPAC has become a partner not only with the festival and Bethany, but they are a partner during our regular Jazz Vespers during the year. So I'm hired by them as a consultant.
And what is your production company? Do you have a name for your production company?
I don't have a production company, Clyde. People just know me and call me. I do a lot of things, but I don't have an official production company. If something comes up, people think I can do it, and usually I can. I just jump on it and do it.
Do you have any favorite artists that you personally have any stories to tell or that you personally like working with? Because I'm quite sure many of the great artists have come through BGO Studios and to do interviews, etc. Anything you can remember that anyone you really particularly like, who was kind to you or cool?
All of the musicians, as I say, always came to my rescue. Okay. I don't want to name any names from yesteryear because it was so many of them, but I will share this little story about an artist that's now very big, and I just love him not only as a musician, but as a person. Before Gregory Porter became as large as he is now, before his career took off, and I might say it should have been larger before it was, but as Betty Carter would say, things happen when they're supposed to. I'm very proud that I was able to present Gregory at Bethany twice.
Wow.
Before he was, quote unquote, this large. He performed at our Jazz Vespers, and he also performed during our regular church service in August. Every August, Bethany presents jazz artists as its music because we have several choirs, but they are all on sabbatical in August. So
I see.
Dr. Howard decided many years ago, why don't we just have some of the most appropriate jazz artists? Not every jazz artist can present his music at a church service. It has to be connected some kind of way.
It's hard to say it, I hate to say it, but it's probably me. When your belly is empty, the hunger's so real, you're too proud to beg, you're too dumb to steal. You search the city for your only friend, no one would you see.
I was able to secure Gregory Porter for our regular church service one August. I do not remember the year. And he stood up in the pulpit and sang Amazing Grace just with his piano player playing. And I tell you, it really turned Bethany out. One of the deacons went home and was playing his CD all afternoon because he called and told me. And since that time, Gregory has appeared at NJ Pack several times, and he has a huge Bethany following.
Thank you all for watching. Dorthaan Kirk, NEA Jazz Master and First Lady of Jazz at Newark's WBGO. We would like to thank Bob Ottenhoff, the founder of WBGO, Thurston Briscoe, and the living, walking jazz encyclopedia, Gary Walker. Ola Rivera, Bobby Sanabria, Al Pryor, Rondo Hamilton, Sheila Anderson, Bob Porter, also Robin Bell Stevens from Jazzmobile, Jack Kleinsinger, Louis Armstrong House Museum, Wynton Marsalis, Sue Yellen. All of these people are helping to keep America's indigenous music alive and moving on to new generations. And a special shout out goes to Keystone Corner founder and director Todd Barkin, who has done so much for me and the entire world of jazz. And also to the late, great Phil Schaap, who did so much for the entire jazz world. May he rest in peace. See you next week for part 2. And don't forget to subscribe to YouTube, Facebook, Rumble. And before you go, I want you to know that WBGO has the whole world swinging. Good night and stay bright.